So the number one most powerful weapon, I think, in all negotiation is shut the hell up. Silence. Okay?
I need to learn that one.
It's art.
Not listening is different.
Shut up.
Silence is uncomfortable, isn't it?
Yes.
He who speaks first loses. Has anybody ever heard that?
Yes.
Buy back your sale.
That's right. He who speaks first loses. And I'm going to tell you a quick story about that. So, I was working on a deal. I think I was a couple years in the business, and I hadn't really done a deal over $10 million. I had a buyer who was a friend of mine, and I knew he wanted to buy a waterfront property in La Jolla. So the beginning of the negotiation is what I call setting the table. Okay, that's another one of your weapons. So one of the things you do is you set the table for your future negotiation today. So I sent him an email and I said, look, there are 3 waterfront properties on the market. They're all priced between 10 and 15 million. This was in La Jolla. I said, what I think you should do, because I know you want a waterfront. He emailed me a year earlier, and I saw him at a party. So I said, what we ought to do is you ought to put an offer on all 3 properties and tell every agent that is the listing agent that you're going to buy a waterfront property in the next 30 days and see who gives us the best deal. They were all between 10 and 15 million. This is a big game. This is not, I did a lot of this at 200, 300, 400, so I'm like, maybe the same strategy there will work with 4 more zeros. So he loved the strategy. So we went, we visited all the properties, we put in 2 or 3 offers, and we were negotiating on one property, and this was the one he liked, this was the one he wanted to buy, and the list price was $13.5. So we went in obviously at $9.5, and we're trying to beat them down. Oh, it's not worth that, this and that. And so we went back and forth, and the agent, we end up at 10.5, and the seller is at 11.5. So we're $1 million apart, right? And to answer your question, when you're doing counters, one of the big things you want to do in a counter situation is send something over that the other party can sign. It's really, really important, because a lot of times I'm having a deal right now and the agent keeps sending me counters on our repairs that aren't complete in terms of like timelines, move outs, everything. So we're constantly having one more negotiation. So it's really important. Your counter matters because it's got to be something that the buyer or the seller can sign and not overly think about. So my client, CEO of a company, and he says, look, you're going to make $270,000 on this deal because it's 2.5% commission. The other agent's going to make that. He said, why don't you guys each make 100? I'll come up and you guys come down. And so the other agent had the listing for a year and a half. She had spent probably $30,000, $40,000 on it. I was not inclined to give that deep of a reduction. It was like a dagger right through my heart. And a lot of times in these conferences, you hear people say, no, I'm not adjusting my commission. How many of you have ever adjusted your commission in a transaction? Ever. So there are some of you that have never adjusted your commission?
I'm new.
Oh, so you haven't. Okay. But everybody that's been in the business for a while, it's sometimes because you're an investor in the property, you are an investor in the property. Your client is giving you 5 or 6%, which you're going to make half of, in return for your selling his property. You are a partner, a very small partner in a deal. If you actually came to me and said, hey, I want to do an investment of $1 million, give me 5%, or $50,000, I'm a small investor. I'm not a decision maker, but I'm a small investor because I'm putting some money in for a return. And mine is sweat equity. I'll work hard. I'll market the deal. I'll do all of that. That's what we're doing. We're investors in these properties. We're not employees. Think of your deal as an investment. You're investing your time, energy, money, and your life in the sale of this property and this deal. So now we're in the negotiation, we're $1 million apart. So rather than respond to him, I said to him, I said, well, what would you pay for the house? He said, well, I'd pay 11. And I said, okay, I'll get that done. I'll talk to you later. I have now a goal. I have now a number. So I went to the other agent and I said, look, I said, I never even mentioned his proposal. My goal is to get 11 million and preserve our commissions. So I went to the other agent and I said, look, if we don't put this deal together, number one, we're both going to lose the deal. Number two, we've got other properties we're looking at. So we're probably going to have to take a little bit of a hit. So could you live with making $220,000? And I'll make 220, you'll make 220, and you get your buyer down, another 280 or whatever it was. Yeah, 280 or 230. So now we're at our number. Now we're at 11 million. She goes back, works the deal out. I called him up and I said, hey, I saved you $500,000. I got you the year $11 million number. I never even talked about the commission, right? And yet first thing he says is, well, what are you gonna make? And so I said to him, I said, well, you're CEO of a company, what'd you make last year? He says, well, I'm not comfortable telling. I go, well, I'm not that comfortable either, but it's my money. I go, well, it is and it isn't. I said, but look, you're a good friend of mine. I'll tell you what I did is I got the other agent to reduce her commission by 0.5 point. I took a 0.5 point hit. You're gonna, not get your 10.5, but you'll get 11. It's an amazing piece of property. I went through the whole story. He goes, fine, okay, let's do it. Signs off, we get into escrow, we go through all of these issues with building on this lot. Turns out part of it's not permitted. And I knew that. I told him, but the lawyers didn't really catch it. And whatever. Long and the short of it is, I go, because we hadn't signed the final document. So we go, and I go to the, he says, look, when I had conference calls with him, I'd get 4 minutes. So I'd call him and I'd email him and I'd say, hey, when can you chat? And he'd say, well, I've got 4 minutes at 11:56 tomorrow. Call me. Swear to God, this is the way the whole transaction went. So in a 45-day period, I had 5 5-minute conversations with him on an $11 million deal. Everything else was by email. That's why it's really important to be able to write well and be very careful what you write. So I get him on. He says, I have 4 minutes tomorrow. I go, where are you? He says, well, I'm over at the Grand Del Mar at a conference. I'm speaking, but I can break out and I'll sign the papers. So he walks out, all excited and cocky, and I'm sitting at a table, and he comes over with his pen like this, and he goes, I'll sign this deal if you and the other agent take a $50,000 hit on your commission right now. Otherwise, I'm not signing the deal. And so I was there, and I was kind of leaning over the paper. So I sat back in my chair like this, and I said, well, that's not what we agreed upon. And I went quiet. And I'm telling you, it was probably a minute, but it was 20 minutes. And it was really hot in that place, and I was trying not to sweat. Because that's one thing I told Lupe. I go, Lupe, we're in the La Jolla office. You've got to turn the air on really cold in that negotiating room. Yeah. Because when it gets hot in there and we're in a tense situation, there's 5 people, we're sweating, we look like we're nervous. So everyone wears a parka in there now, because it's ice cold. But I said, we can't look nervous. So I sat back and I waited, and I waited, and I waited. And he goes, oh, fuck it. Signs it. He says, I don't care. And the reason he did that was because the negotiation was for fun for him.
Yeah.
50 grand is a line item. I did another deal with him, and I said, hey, this was a bigger deal. And he goes, hey, I said, hey, I think I can get us a $250,000 reduction on this $24 million deal. He said, if you can't get $1 million, it's not worth my time. Don't even call me. So my point is, for certain clients, these numbers are meaningless for them, but they're very big for us. And they respect you in the future when you hold your line.